Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, uh, the foreign trade policy has been announced after a gap of almost 3 years. So typically, foreign trade policy was issued for a 5-year period, and normally, this policy will get revamped at the end of the tenure, while we will have a lot of changes which happen during the 5-year period. But so the government had been following a sort of a system of issuing a new foreign trade policy at the end of every 5 years. But due to COVID, which happened in 2020, when the policy was due for a revamp, the new policy announcement was not made, and it had been delayed for a couple of years. And finally, we have the new revamp policy which has been issued on 31st of March, applicable for the next few years. So what are the significant changes that has been made? The first and foremost change is to do away with this 5-year concept. And the idea is that the policy should continue, in the shape and form which has been announced. It is, of course, subject to various changes as we go along. But the concept of having a new foreign trade policy has sort of been done away with. The other changes that we will look at is, how, India will achieve the objective of achieving the target of an export of $2 trillion by 2030. We have seen, good amount of growth in exports last year, with the exports touching about $750 billion in FY 22-23. And the idea is to, let this increase by 2.5 times in next 7 years. And that is what the new policy and the various announcements which will be done by the government is to ensure that this objective is made by the time we reach 2030. We had, some challenges, some disputes for certain schemes which were like taken up before the WTO. And we have seen the shift happening in terms of the schemes which are currently there in the policy to ensure that the schemes are now WTO compliant. And therefore, we are seeing a move from an incentive-based scheme to a remission-based scheme, basically suggesting that an exporter will be compensated for the taxes incurred in India. And that is the limit which the government will want to draw, rather than an incentive-based scheme, which was not linked with the local taxes being incurred, which gets embedded in the cost of product. So, that gradual shift sort of, which was required because of the WTO ruling is also now finding, the premise of the new policy. Certain schemes like EPCG still continues, which are sort of not strictly in compliance with the WTO scheme. Having, barring those exceptions, by and large, the new policy will sort of, take forward all the schemes which are WTO compliant. There are several other measures which are being taken by the government, which is not sort of part of the foreign trade policy, in order to sort of augment the export growth, which are the free trade agreements being discussed and signed with various countries. We have seen in recent times signed with the United Arab Emirates, one with Australia, where in principle sort of discussion has happened and it has been implemented in parts. There is a foreign trade policy, free trade agreement being discussed with European Union, as well as the other GCC countries is also in their pipeline. So with all this sort of, processes being taken and the areas being covered, the idea is to ensure that India grows in terms of global export and, increase the size in the global trade. Without taking too much time further, I would invite my colleagues Vaibhav and Ruturaj to take you through the fine print and the details of the new policy. And they would be happy to take any questions that you may have once the presentation is done by them. So over to you, Vaibhav and Ruturaj.
Thank you, Neeraj. Good afternoon, everyone. Let us first go through some of the key highlights of the new policy. First of all, what we can see is that there's a change in approach, as Neeraj already mentioned, that the policy is now envisaging moving from incentive-based regime. The policy is also making an endeavor to build up ecosystem which itself can act as a boost for export promotion. The next thing what we are seeing in the policy is that export promotion through collaboration. This time, the policy is talking about active engagement by the government at a state level, at district level, wherein they will come up and enable the export promotion. Importance of ease of doing business can never be overemphasized, and that has been rightly acknowledged in the policy. And there have been specific provisions which have been introduced. Changes in processes have been introduced to promote and enhance the ease of doing business. Number of emerging areas, for example, e-commerce, have now been recognized as a part of the foreign trade policy, and they are well attended to, if I must. And there are specific provisions which have been made to cater to these emerging areas. One specific and important thing that we are seeing in the policy is that there's a greater thrust on trade facilitation. As it is, Indian custom has been striving to expedite and safeguard the international supply chain. I think that endeavor is also visible in the Foreign Trade Policy 2023, wherein there is a great uh, uh, endeavor of increasing the trade facilitation so that the international supply chain can be expedited. And finally, the policy is seeming to be dynamic and responsive, wherein the government is likely to engage with industry and trade on a regular basis to take their feedback and tweak the policy on a more regular basis rather than looking at a 5 year window. As Neeraj already mentioned, the policy is now set up as a perennial policy. It does not have a sunset clause. So the policy is not looking at a limited window of 5 years. Uh, the intent of the government, as I mentioned, is to seek continuous feedback from the industry, from trade, and streamline the processes and update the policy on a regular basis. In 2019, the WTO dispute panel had come up with a ruling which had questioned number of export incentive schemes provided by India, including EPCG. This was on the ground that the schemes which are provided by India are not consistent with the SCM agreement under WTO. And it was in fact as a result of a complaint filed by the United States. And in this context, there was a doubt and there was an apprehension that what will happen to many of these policies like EPCG or advance authorization for that matter. What we are seeing in the policy is that as of now, these schemes, EPCG, advance authorization, have been continued. There's one welcome scheme which is also announced as a part of this foreign trade policy. A one-time amnesty scheme has been announced for export obligation defaults in case of EPCG and advance authorization. And you will hear more about this scheme from Vaibhav after some time. As I mentioned, there's a great deal of emphasis on trade facilitation by involving technology, automation, and continuous process re-engineering. There's a significant focus on capacity building. So there's a shift that instead of promoting exports by giving incentives, create an ecosystem which is capable enough to automatically enhance the exports. So there's a great focus on capacity building that we are seeing in this foreign trade policy. There's special attention to e-commerce, as I mentioned, and the SCOMET related policy has also been streamlined. Now, having set the context of what are the key features, let us deep dive into what are we seeing at a chapter level. Now, in a pragmatic move, the Foreign Trade Policy 2023 has been structured close to the earlier foreign trade policy. So what you can see on the screen is overall flow and content of the foreign trade policy has been kept aligned. Most of the chapters that we are seeing have been retained in the foreign trade policy, and more or less the content and the processes mentioned in that are similar. The third chapter in Foreign Trade Policy 2015-20 dealt with export from India schemes, so mainly the MEIS, SEIS schemes. This chapter has now been completely omitted. We are not finding anything similar in Foreign Trade Policy 2023. Instead, this chapter has been replaced by a completely new chapter called Developing District as Export Hubs. In addition to that, we have two more new chapters which have been introduced. One about promoting export of cross-border trade in digital economy, which is basically the e-commerce side of things. And there's a separate chapter dealing with the SCOMET related provisions. Now, while I mentioned that most of the structure has been retained, there are significant changes in policies as well as processes that we have seen. And now we'll walk you through chapter-wise important amendments or changes which we are seeing in foreign trade policy of 2023. The first chapter, which deals with general provisions, has seen quite a few amendments. The first and most important change is that India is signatory of WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement, or TFA. So it is proposed that a National Committee on Trade Facilitation, NCTF, should be constituted, and this committee will facilitate the overall coordination and implementation of the TFA. What this committee is supposed to do is it is expected to improve the ease of doing business, as in it is supposed to take initiatives which will improve ease of doing business, reduction in the cargo release time, promote paperless regulatory environment, uh, encourage a transparent and predictable legal regime, and finally enable creation of an investment climate which can promote a better infrastructure. There's a new online facility created for obtaining RCMC and registration certificates under the DGFT regime. So there'll be an online facility wherein e-RCMC and e-registration certificates will be obtained. Similarly, for certificate of origins, there's a portal which is developed which will issue e certificate of origin either for preferential or non-profit preferential reasons. This e-certificate will be endorsed with a QR code, which will enable the authentication process of the certificate of origin. It is proposed that a 24/7 help desk will be set up, which will help the exporters who are filing any applications with the DGFT. There was a scheme called Town of Export Excellence, or TEE. This scheme has been there in the previous foreign trade policies also, wherein any town which produces more than 750 crore worth of goods can be can be notified as a town for export excellence based on the potential for export growth. Already there are 39 towns which have been notified as a TEE. Over and above that, the Foreign Trade Policy 2023 now names four more towns, namely Faridabad, Varanasi, Mirzapur, and Moradabad for as town for export excellence. Duty-free entitlements or BCD exemptions, which were provided for handloom, handicraft, leather, footwear, sports goods, toys, and marine sections, have now been restricted only to marine, sports goods, and toys. There's one important change, and I would say it's a welcome change, which is reduction of threshold for having the status holder or becoming a star export house. What you can see on your screens is that the threshold for export performance for 2 to 5 star export houses have been substantially reduced. Now, the benefit of that will be that many of the exporters who were presently not falling under the criteria of star house can now avail the benefit of becoming a export house, a star export house, and get allied benefits which are provided under foreign trade policy. The important change, procedural change, I would say, is that this threshold needs to be met for last three preceding financial years. There's one responsibility which has been in fact cast on the star or status holders. The status holders are supposed to act as a partner with government and enable development of budding exporters. So what the policy envisages is that any status holder who is already recognized as a star house or a status holder, is supposed to train any of the budding exporters, and they're expected to spend minimum 6 weeks in a year in doing that. So there's a responsibility or partnership which is expected to happen with government in development of budding exporters. In the next chapter, we are seeing again number of changes in chapter 2. First of all, one change which we are seeing is that the term technology has been specifically recognized in policy. In earlier foreign trade policies, we did not have specific emphasis or recognition of technology as a service. That's what we are seeing in FTP 2023. Uh, there's one clarity which is brought by this policy is that in case of service exporters, IC is required to be obtained at the time of rendering services itself. This was sort of a bone of contention during the previous foreign trade policies. In fact, there was a Bombay High Court judgment in case of Smarty Solutions, which had held that it is not essential to have IEC at the time of rendering services. It is important that you have IEC when you're claiming foreign trade policy benefits. But now that logic is out of the window, the system, the policy is absolutely clear that any service exporter has to have IEC at the time of rendering services itself and not at a later stage while claiming benefits. There is some increase in the powers of DGFT that have been proposed, wherein DGFT will be allowed to clear restricted items in case of STs. Uh, as far as second-hand spares for capital goods are concerned, those have made freely importable. And there's only one condition that a chartered engineer should certify that these spares have at least 80% of residual life. With that certificate, it will be now freely importable. It wasn't so earlier. Special provisions have been made in respect of mercantile trade. Now, what is mercantile trade? It's a transaction where goods actually don't cross the custom frontiers of India. The goods are purchased from another country and supplied to a different country. So only an Indian intermediary is involved in this transaction. So with regard to mercantile trade, there are some new provisions which have been introduced in this policy. There's one export scheme for self-certification of origin, which has been introduced, and it's definitely a welcome move. Typically, if I have to obtain a certificate of origin, there are designated agencies which I have to approach to, and these certificate of origins are required to be presented to customers outside India to showcase that goods have originated in India. Now, there is a scheme which has been provided, it's an optional scheme which has been provided for manufacturers who are status holders. So they can apply for self-certification of origin. The approved exporters will be entitled to self-certify that their goods or the goods that are manufactured are originating from India. And these self-certifications will be considered valid for claiming benefits under free trade agreements, under preferential trade agreements, etc. In order to give this certification, the status holders will be verified. The DGFT will verify whether status holders have sufficient infrastructure, whether they have trained manpower, and on that assessment, the exporters will be allowed to self-certify. Chapter 3 is a completely new chapter, as I was talking about. It's about developing district as export hubs. This is a chapter which is focused on promotion of exports at a district level by developing the trade ecosystem at a grassroots level. So what is envisaged is that there will be district export promotion committee, which will be set up by the government. This committee will be set up in every district. It will be chaired by the collector or the development commissioner, and it will also be co-chaired by DGFT regional authority, and there'll be other stakeholders who will be members in this committee. Now, the role of this committee will be to prepare a district export action plan. So this committee is supposed to come up or devise a plan of export. It has to identify and address bottlenecks for exports. And it will also support local exporters or manufacturers to scale up their operations and also find potential buyers. Uh, DGFT will also develop an online monitoring portal wherein states, districts, DGFTs can upload information regarding products and services which have export potential in every district. And this portal will also work to monitor the progress of this plan. There are training, dissemination, information programs which are to be conducted by government. So what we are seeing clearly is that government is likely to play a very active role in developing an ecosystem which will work as a booster for exports. This, I think, is a clearly welcome move. Having said that, the real benefits will depend on right execution of this plan. So we'll have to wait and watch as to how successful these export hubs or district export hubs become in times to come. Uh, Next is chapter 4, which talks about duty exemption and remission schemes. Duty exemption schemes include advance authorization scheme, in which raw materials can be imported without payment of any customs duties. DFIA schemes, in which again raw material can be imported without any basic custom duty. On the other hand, duty remission schemes include duty drawback, which is governed by the Department of Revenue, ROSCTL scheme, which is mainly for the textile industry, and the RODTEP scheme. Now, all these schemes which I mentioned about have been there and have been number of exporters have been claiming these benefits. The basic structure and the benefits given under these schemes have been kept intact under the policy. Even the processes related to these policies are more or less the same. But there are few changes which have been made in this chapter. First, the ROSL scheme, which was to mitigate the incidence of VAT and state taxes on export of garments, has now been removed because this scheme had become anyway redundant after introduction of the 2019 scheme. So this is more of an alignment change. One welcome move for MSME that we are seeing is that application fee for MSME users is reduced for claiming all these benefits. There is a special advance authorization scheme for apparel and clothing sector, which will facilitate prompt execution of export orders. In fact, there are timelines which have been prescribed for setting up of norms in case of this special authorization scheme. The minimum value addition for normal advance authorization will be 15%. For specific schemes like spices, the export obligation will be, or the value addition will be 25%. There is one self-ratification scheme which allows an importer to ratify further or additional imports on its own. In that scheme, there are a few changes. So if we have a situation where there is no SION norms available or no ad hoc norms available, or there are norms available, but the exporter wants to use some additional inputs. In this case, there is a facility of doing a self-ratification. This scheme or this benefit is made available in respect of any company which is an AEO holder. Also, if there's a company which is a status holder and it has already applied for AEO status, then the self-certification will be allowed even for such status holders. There are some items on which self-ratification is not allowed. For example, items with basic custom duty of more than 30% will not be eligible to import on a self-declaration basis. For AEO, self-certification is allowed to satisfy the actual user condition. There was an option of submitting documents in a physical form for fixation of ad hoc norms, etc. That option is no more there. Everything has to be done in an online manner. And lastly, any documents or records which showcases consumption and utilization of duty-free import, those have to be stored for the period of 3 years after getting the EODC or the discharge certificate. So even after receiving discharge certificate, all the records regarding import and utilization will have to be retained for a period of 3 years. Now we move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 5 on EPCG. And I'll request Vaibhav to take this. Yeah,
Thank you,
Vaibhav.
Rutura. So, Chapter 5 pertains to EPCG scheme. And most of you are aware that in 2019, the dispute panel of WTO, based on the complaint of United States of America, had ruled that most of the incentive schemes which are provided by government of India are against the agreement of subsidies and countervailing schemes and therefore should be stopped. And because of this, there was a lot of apprehension between the industry as well as the consulting world that whether this scheme will be continued or not. And the scheme has been continued, and this is a great welcome measure. Now, given that the scheme has been continued, a lot of changes have been made to the scheme. And if one weighs these changes towards beneficial as well as adverse, considering the previous scheme, then the changes weigh more towards being adverse. But having said that, the continuation of scheme itself was a subject matter of apprehension. And if the scheme has been continued with some modification, I think it's a great sigh of relief for the industry. Now, coming to the changes which have been made is EPCG benefit EPCG scheme benefits will not be available for goods imported under project import. So typically what used to happen is, if you are aware that project import provide a concessional rate of basic customs duty, like currently the tariff rate prescribed is 7.5%, and previous rate, which was prior to first rate 2022, was 10%. So a EPCG holder would actually take a benefit of project import, leading to a reduced duty of customs, and then also would opt for an EPCG scheme. And this would result in a reduced export obligation, as the duty implications are raised under lesser under project import. Now this won't be available. We can continue to import the goods which are eligible under the scheme, but not under project import, and then claim the benefit of EPCG scheme. Post-export EPCG duty space has been omitted. Now, as a concept, this would typically mean that a EPCG holder would obtain a license and then import or procure goods on payment of applicable duties. He would pay the duty, and then he will fulfill the export obligation. And once the export obligations were fulfilled, he used to get transferable duty script, which was transferable. And therefore, now this scheme has been omitted, and it would typically impact MSME or new industrial setup, or an industry which is subject to season, weather, or conditions, or variations in demand. And therefore, if under the earlier policy, if the holder was not sure about fulfillment of export obligation, he would adopt this scheme and he would absolve or save himself from the implication of interest. But currently, if he is not able to fulfill the export obligation, he will be required to pay the applicable interest. Enabling provisions about average export obligation have been inserted. Now, this provision does not make much of a change. The only difference is, earlier there was an understanding from reading of the provisions and the policy given thereunder. But currently, Rutura, the previous slide. But currently, but currently a specific provision has been inserted to this effect. The computation remains the same, meaning thereby in the licensing year, in the year in which the license has been obtained, the average export obligation or average export turnover of preceding 3 financial years is taken of the same or similar product, which is considered as average export obligation, and anything above that is considered towards fulfillment of export obligation. The computation remains the same. The validity period of EPCG authorization for import have been increased from 18 months to 24 months. Import of capital goods shall be subject to actual user conditions till export obligation is completed and EODC is discharged. The word and the EODC is granted has been added to the policy, previously they were missing. But as a practice, since EPCG scheme was quite old, the industry would generally used to adopt a position to dispose of this capital goods only after EODC was granted, and further they would have received a no objection certificate from the customs authority. But putting this provision removes the ambiguity and any scope for litigation. Export proceeds amendments have been made to include export proceeds in Indian rupees towards EO obligation fulfillment. So along with the word convertible foreign currency, word Indian rupees has been added, and this amount has to be received as per RBI guidelines through designated special escrow account through the bank. Now, addition have been made under the policy to provide that EPCG authorization holder will be entitled to either of the following benefits, even if he is qualifying to more than one benefit. Still, he will be eligible, or he can claim only one of the benefits from the following: reduced EO, that is 75% EO for indigenous capital goods, incentive for early EO fulfillment. So, if EO is fulfilled within 3 years of import or lesser time period, then 75% EO is again available. Reduced EO for green technology products, again 75% EO. Reduced EO for Northeast regions and Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, where 25% EO is available. The next change are pertaining to the timeline and composition fee or late fee for EO extensions. These changes we have bifurcated or classified into 3 baskets. The first pertaining to the first block, EO period for the first block. So previously, the policy didn't provide any time limit for making an application for extension of EO period of the first block. Now, the policy has mandated that the application for extension of EO period of the first block has to be made within 6 months of the expiry of first block. Now, the late fee which are payable have also undergone a change. So, in addition to composition fee of 2% on duty saved amount proportionate to unfulfilled portion of EO pertaining to the block, late fees will be payable as follows: up to 6 months, no late fee; beyond 6 months, till 6 years, late fee of 10,000; and beyond 6 years, INR 10,000 plus additional late fee of 5,000 for each year per authorization. And what happens if EO period is not extended? Then the holder will be required to pay the applicable duty along with interest within a period of 6 months of the expiry of first block. Now, second change pertains to extension of EO period. Suppose your EO period, for example, is 6 years and you want to extend to 1 more year and additional 1 year, so 2 years. So, 2 extensions from the date of expiry of 1 year each were available under the previous policy as well as the current policy. However, the mechanisms have been changed, and therefore, here the change in mechanism is beneficial, adverse as well as adverse when compared to the previous policy, depending on the export capability or potential of the exporter. To understand this change, we need to first understand the previous policy. So in the previous policy also, 2 extensions from the date of expiry of 1 year each were provided. However, 2 options were provided to the exporter. The first option which was provided to the exporter was that he could pay a composition fee of 5% and 10% respectively for the proportionate duty amount saved on unfulfillment of export obligations for each year of extension. This was option 1. Option 2 was where he could actually increase his overall export obligation by 10% and 20% respectively in each of the 2 years. And currently, the proposed changes, the change under the FTP is 2 extensions from the date of expiry of 1 year each on payment of composition fee equal to 2% of proportionate duty saved amount on unfulfilled export obligation for each year of extension. So if you look, the composition fee has been reduced substantially from 5 and 10% to 2% each. But the option for availing enhanced export obligation has been taken away. Now, how it is adverse or beneficial when compared to previous policy is, that suppose I am a holder of an EPCG license and I had the capability to enhance my export obligation and fulfill in next 1 or 2 years of extension as provided, I would have opted for that option under the previous policy, and this would have saved me from paying immediately the composition fee. So this 2% each of financial year would have been savings to me, which is not permissible. And interestingly, this change has also been made applicable to licenses which are issued during the previous policy, that is 15-20. Now here there is a possibility that holder of such license who still wants to avail the option of enhanced export obligation to mitigate or save on the composition fee may dispute the current change being made applicable to the licenses issued under the previous policy, as when the licenses were issued during the previous policy there was no such condition. So this will have to be seen. Timelines for application for extension and its late fees have undergone a change, which we have tabulated here for your ready reference. Maybe you may glance for 10-20 seconds and you can take the next point. Now, the paperless application will be there for EO discharge. So it will be only paperless application which will be followed. The common service provider is also eligible for benefit of EPCG scheme. Now, what a common service provider would mean, that is, first, he should be certified by a DGFT headquarters, which is nothing but DGFT, or Department of Commerce in a town of export excellence, or Prime Minister Mega Integrated Textile Region and Appeller Park. So just to give you an example, suppose there is a service provider, and the example could be that he is based in the region of textile, and therefore he is providing the services of embroidery on the garment. Now that region may have multiple or various manufacturers of garments who would then not typically, have this process of embroidery implemented within their manufacturing process, but would then outsource this function, and this CSC would provide these services to couple of them or a few such manufacturers who would finally export that garment.
Vaibhav, sorry to interrupt. I think there are 2-3 feedbacks saying that the voice is not clear. I mean, people are not able to catch few words. So maybe if you can change, either switch to from headphone to regular, or maybe bring the system a little closer.
Yeah, no, I will just switch to music.
Is it audible now?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So in such case, such service provider is termed as a common service provider. Common utility services or infrastructure services like electricity, water, gas, sanitation, sewage, telecommunication, transportation, etc. These are not considered for benefit of CSP. Capital goods should be installed within a T or PM Mitra to get this benefit. The list of green technology products have been broadbanded. We have seen in the previous slide that green technology products enjoy a concessional EO of 75%. So the list has been broadbanded to include battery electric vehicles, LED lights, vertical framing equipment, wastewater treatment and recycling, rainwater harvesting system, and rainwater filters and green hydrogen are added to the list. Policy now specifically provides for an option to surrender the unutilized authorization. No penalty or fees is levied. Now, this provision has been introduced in the current policy, but practically in the previous policies, though there was no such provision, but the industry used to adopt this practice where they used to surrender the unauthorized authorization, and it didn't entail any penal or implications at that point also. Additions have been made by prescription of specific procedure with respect to procurement of capital goods under the EPCG scheme from an SEZ. Application fee are reduced for an MSME users. An annual requirement regarding fulfillment of EO was required under the previous policy to be submitted by 30th April. This has now been changed to 30th June. Further, it is an online filing. And a provision has been added which provides that a regularization can be done in case there is a delay in filing by making a payment of late fee of INR 5,000 per year for each authorization. So probably this will in a way incentivize or act that the holders do file their annual report within the timelines. Next, we were dealing with special one-time amnesty scheme for default in export obligations. This scheme is a one-time settlement in export obligations by advance authorization and EPCG holders, which is being introduced from 1st April 2023. All pending cases of default in meeting export obligation can be regularized on payment of all customs duties that were exempted in proportion to unfulfilled export obligation. Now, coverage of the scheme for foreign trade policy 914. So after policy of 914, this doesn't cover. It covers a period of 914 and prior to that. For policy of 914, where advance authorization and EPCG licenses are issued up to 31st March 2015 will get qualified. Similarly, advance authorization and EPCG licenses issued under FTP 2004-2009 or FTVs prior to that, where EO period, original or extended, was valid till 12th August 2013 would get covered. Scheme cover cases adjudicated or in appeal, meaning there were pending adjudication as well. However, exclude cases under investigation or cases adjudicated for or involving fraud, misdeclaration, or unauthorized diversification of material and or capital goods. Benefit under the scheme not applicable if duties and interests are already paid in full, that is before registration under this scheme. Now, what are the payments and the reliefs? All exempted customs duties have to be paid. Interest till date of payment has been capped at 100% of the exempted duties. However, it is very pertinent to note that no interest is payable on portion of additional customs duties and special additional customs duties. And well-drafted illustrations are provided in the public notice to do this computation. Applications to be enabled on DGFC websites and registrations have to be done on or before 30th June. Payment of duties and interest to be done on or before 30th September, and payment to be done to jurisdictional customs authorities. However, if there is a partial default in export obligation, upon specific request and application, the RA shall intimate the duty and interest payable to the applicant. The applicant can then pay the said duty and interest to the jurisdictional customs authorities and submit proof of payment to the RA. No refund or credit of duties paid will be allowed under any law. A declaration to the tune, an undertaking to the tune of no refund or credit duty or no refund or credit of duties has to be provided, which becomes part of the application. Based on evidence of payment of duty and interest along with relevant documents, the concerned RA will issue the EODC. Next is the chapter 6, which is EOU, ESTP, STP, BTP. Now, most of the, the previous chapter vis-a-vis the current chapter are largely same. Only few changes in conditions and processes have been incorporated. So, export of comment items were subject to the conditions under ITC-HS. Now, a separate chapter has been added and created under the current policy, which is chapter 10, which will be dealt at a later stage by Ruturaj. And therefore, the conditions are also provided under there, which has to be adhered to. Now, EOU, ESTP, STP, BTP units may export through other BTP units also. So previously, it was that EOU, ESTP, STP, and BTP units were permitted to export through other EOU, ESTP, STP units, and even SEZ units. But for reasons unknown, BTP units were not permissible. Now, export through BTP units are also made permissible. Amendment has been made relating to conversion of DTA if he is in possession of EPCG authorization to EOU, ESTP, STP, BTP. The amendment suggests that in such a case, the DTA unit should either fulfill the export obligation or pay the applicable duties and then only they can go for this conversion. Amendments have been made to provide that in case of goods or part thereof being imported or procured indigenously, which are found defective or unfit for use or have been damaged or become defective subsequently. Earlier, there were only two options which were of replacement or destruction. The current policy provides that in addition to replacement or destruction, return of goods against refund of purchase value is permissible. Now, changes regarding requirement, exemption from requirement of bank guarantee at the time of import or going for job work in DTA has been provided. Further, some conditions have also been provided regarding exemption for EOU, again relating to bank guarantee. A development commissioner was, they were providing or extending the LOP or LOI, letter of permission or letter of intent, which were permissible for a period up till 5 years. Now a specific provision has been inserted where it says that a period lesser than 5 years, LOP or LOI can be extended to complete the exit formality if a unit is planning to exit. Next change is about solar power and wind power plants are now covered under the ambit of captive power plants subject to the condition that no tax or duty benefits stipulated under EO scheme shall be available for setting up as well as operation and maintenance of such wind and solar power plants. So typically, if compared to previous policy, this doesn't entail any ramification from tax outlay or savings. But I think this provision has been introduced to make it align with SEZ because SEZ is having an identical provision. Handbook of procedures providing provisions relating to revival of sick units have been deleted. Now coming to chapter 7, which is deemed export. Largely this chapter is aligned with previous and there are no major changes with just two mentions that one provision or one clause or para has been deleted, which would imply that deemed export benefit on supply of fuel to specified projects listed for petroleum operations under notification 50 by 2017, that is general exemption notification, shall not be available. Further, the objective of the chapter has been amended to specifically include promotion of Make in India. So to go with the current tone, that has been done. Now I hand over back to Rituraj to take us ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Weber. Now, coming to the last few chapters of the FTP. First of all, is my voice audible? Weber, can you confirm that?
Yeah, Rituraj, it's audible.
Okay. So the next chapter is chapter 8, which deals with quality complaints and trade disputes. This chapter was there even in earlier policies, and the existing provisions on quality complaints and trade disputes remain largely unchanged. What is the purpose of this chapter really is that any parties, so it could be an Indian importer or exporter, or likewise a foreign customer or foreign vendor, they can use the forum regarding any quality complaints or any disputes regarding unethical commercial dealings between the Indian party and foreign party. There is a committee on quality complaints which sort of takes care of these disputes. The same committee will be continued. The existing committee will continue. Also, the existing common digital platform for filing the complaints will be retained. So the online forum through which complaints were raised, the same will continue even under the Foreign Trade Policy 2023. Scope of complaints or disputes extend to supply of services and technology. Now, this is new. Earlier, the scope of services, the scope of complaint largely related to goods. So it could be about quality of goods or unethical commercial dealings regarding goods. The change that we are seeing is that now, if there is any complaint regarding supply of service, supply of technology, that can also be addressed through this forum. So it is expected that now this dispute mechanism may be used more often or what it was being used earlier. Important to note that disputes between two or more Indian entities or two or more foreign entities are not covered. So either of the party has to be in India as well as out of India. Only then the matter can be heard by this forum. The next chapter that we are seeing, chapter 9, is again a new chapter, and it is taking care of the emerging areas like e-commerce. So this chapter has been introduced to provide framework for cross-border uh, trade through digital economy, that is largely the e-commerce. What are we seeing in this chapter is basically the policy regarding e-commerce and cross-border has been spelled out. The concepts like e-commerce, export of goods, e-commerce, export of services, e-commerce platform have been specifically defined in the policy. One welcome change is that for exports through courier, earlier there was a limit that per consignment value could not be 5 lakhs, above 5 lakhs. Now that has been changed, and now we are seeing that the extended limit is 10 lakhs. So exports can happen through courier, wherein the value of consignment can be up to 10 lakh rupees. Exportability or importability of goods through courier will be regulated by the ITCHS. So what I can send out and what I can bring in through courier will be driven very much by ITCHS. As far as promotion of export through e-commerce or any new emerging trends, they have mentioned that Niryat Bandhu scheme, which is a scheme already in existence, will have a component to deal with promotion of e-commerce. There will be market reach, outreach activities which will be undertaken. There'll be workshops, creation of electronic content with specific focus and capacity building and skill development exercise, which will be carried out to specifically address the needs of emerging areas like e-commerce. One important scheme is introduced as a part of this new chapter, which is e-commerce export hubs. So it is proposed that e-commerce export hubs will be set up. These will be more like a center for favorable business infrastructure, which can be used by e-commerce exporters. What are these hubs supposed to do? These hubs can basically support the overall e-commerce exporters in handling their packing, labeling, certification, testing, or any of the activities. For example, cold storage facility can be set up as a part of export hub, and that hub will be then entitled for certain other benefits from the foreign trade policy. Any company which is willing to set up export hub can make an application to DGFT. So it is expected that an export hub will be essentially set up through a private initiative. Uh, Setting up hubs through a private public partnership is also envisaged. This ECEH, that is the e-commerce export hub, will be provided assistance under market access initiative. So there will be, so any company which is willing to set up an export hub can get financial assistance from the MAI scheme. There's specific emphasis on promotion of e-commerce through postal route. For that, a new scheme or a new center called Dagghar Niryat Kendras will be set up throughout the country, which will work as a hub and spoke model for foreign hub and spoke model with foreign post offices to facilitate the cross-border e-commerce and enable artisans, weavers, small players to reach international market with better ease. There's a specific focus on e-commerce that we are seeing, and that will help the Digital India focus to go ahead. So one of the initiative of government of Digital India, I think this whole new chapter is taking it in that direction. And it is expected that all the necessary enablements, for example, changes required in IT system, changes required at the post, Department of Commerce, CBIC, etc., will be completed in the next 6 months. So it is expected that all the enablers that are being talked about will become active in the span of next 6 months. The last chapter, chapter 10, I mean, after that there's chapter 11, but it just deals with definition. So last chapter, chapter 10, this deals with SCOMET. Now, SCOMET basically means special chemicals, organisms, material, equipment, and technologies. So it's an acronym for these items. Uh, India is signatory to various international conventions which obligates that export of any item which is dual use item, for example, any item which can have a military use as well as civilian use, which are falling under these COMET categories, those exports should be regulated. So there is a requirement that India regulates exports of these COMET items. Provisions relating to SCOMET were always present in the foreign trade policy. They were made a part of ITCHS. They were provided in the handbook of procedures. So what this chapter now is doing is it's providing an overarching structure, and it is streamlining all the provisions relating to SCOMET at one place. So SCOMET, this chapter 10 of SCOMET talks about various categories. It talks about licensing jurisdictions and procedures uh, for obtaining various authorizations. There's one important scheme which has been brought as a part of this chapter, which is voluntary self-disclosure scheme. Now, in case any exporter has missed out on their compliances in relating to SCOMET, they have been given an opportunity to voluntarily disclose these gaps. That is certainly a welcome move. Uh, Lastly, what we have seen in this policy is that there is a significant focus on ease of doing business, as I had mentioned in the beginning itself. So in that line, there are a number of changes which have been made in the processes. First of all, online approvals without any physical interface is the theme of the FTP. So what is expected is that there'll be whole faceless mechanism which will get initiated, and all the approvals will be online and without any physical interface. It is clearly welcome move. We can only expect that all the applications which are made under foreign trade policy, be it for advance authorization, EPCG, EODC discharge, all of them become much more streamlined and expedited because of this change. There's also an automatic approval mechanism which has been provided. And this automatic approval mechanism is expected to reduce the processing time. What you can see on the table is that what are the standard current processing times for processing of an advance authorization application, EPCG application, revalidation of authorization, and extension of export obligation application. Typically, these applications were being fulfilled within 3 to 7 days. Sometimes it was going over a month also. These are the standard timelines, but practically what we have seen, especially for extension of export obligation, sometimes even in case of EPCG, the actual time taken for processing the application is much larger than what we are seeing on the table. It is now expected that all these applications will go on an automatic route approval, and the time required for that will be 1 day. We'll have to see this in action, but if this is implemented as expected, then this is a fantastic move for exporters as well as importers. There is a reduction for user charges for MSME specifically when they're going for an advance authorization or EPCG. So what we can see on the table is that what are the user charges for non-MSME vis-a-vis what are the charges for MSME for various license values. You can take a look at it. Basically, what can be seen is that MSME are given preference. They have been provided with a much lower user charges, and that will definitely incentivize or support the MSMEs. So this was the last slide that we wanted to basically discuss. What we can see from the overall analysis of the foreign trade policy 2023 is that it is definitely providing a robust framework for all the importers and exporters. Also, the policy has capability of adapting itself to any changes or any challenges which will be presented by the global trade dynamics. So on and all, if we see, the policy seems to be a much futuristic, and it is actually embracing a lot of global outlook in terms of many aspect. As Neeraj mentioned in the beginning, that the policy is excluding the EPCG component. The policy, I think, is much more compliant with the WTO and global norms. So with this, we would like to open the floor for any questions. You can type in your questions in the Q&A box. I can already see some questions, so I'll begin with those. So there's one question that I can see, which is there any specific impact on traders? Currently, we are availing ROTTEP, ROCTL, and drawback. So to answer that question, there is no change for traders. They have not made any specific changes for that matter in any of the policies that were mentioned, which is ROTTEP, ROSCTL, and drawback. So the benefit which are there will continue to be there, and in the respect of that, there is no change that we are expecting. Yeah, if there are any more questions, I think we can take those. I don't see any more questions. Okay, there's one question which says that does the current policy change anything under existing section 6.08? So is there any specific change in chapter 6? Vaibhav, you can take this, but I think as Vaibhav mentioned, largely the chapter 6 has been kept intact. But Vaibhav, if you want to add anything specific, you can add to it.
Yeah, sure. Before that, I would just like to address Manisha Patnaik's question. Is it possible to enhance the EO value? Now, from an EPCG perspective, which we discussed, the current policy says that enhancement of EO value for extension of the EO period has been restricted. It was available under previous policy, and the policy also, implies that this will be applicable even for the licenses which have been issued under the previous policy 1520, where there was no such restriction, or no, the option is withdrawn now. So basis that one could litigate saying that this should not be made applicable to the licenses issued under the previous policy. That is one. And coming to 6.08, any specific question, if it can be phrased, it would help us to answer.
Yeah, so as of now, the question just reads that does the current policy change anything under existing 6.08A? Yeah, so I think maybe if there's any, if the query is maybe we can take that one separately. There's, I think, looking at the time, we can take one more question, Vaibhav, that is again related to EPCG. The question is there any impact on past EPCG or advanced authorization license, or they shall continue as normal? Would you like to take that?
Yeah, they shall continue as normal. For the past licenses, there is nothing except which we discussed under Manisha Patnaik's question, that for the EPCG license issued in past for having the enhanced export obligation, the current policy says that that option will not be available, and therefore we may see litigation around this area.
All right, I think looking at the time, we will go ahead and end the session. If there are any more questions which we have not been able to answer, we will reach out to those participants separately. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for giving your time and attending our session. I hope you found it useful, and we hope to see you guys in our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.